Naomi, do you want to go first? So I'm just going to tell, we're collecting questions that might pertain to bits left over that need to complete the set of foundations so that people are clear on that, and then we're going to see if we can kind of weave that together.
It's about fullness of intention and wanting to working with the all the bits that have been taught, where this paradigm sits with awakening. So how that fits and how participation fits with awakening, because there are parts of what has been experienced here that feel like what some people describe aspects of awakening, although I understand that the logos of awakening is also really fascinating.
Okay, great. So I won't repeat until I try to collect them and see. Yes. I'm sorry.
I wonder if you have something more to say about creating, discovering.
Okay, good. Thank you. Dave?
About the role of logos, which one of the stars in the constellation, and just a sense that it feels like there have been times when something has been soul-making without having a sort of an obvious role of logos, at least in the moment. So, two quick examples. One, in terms of movement, sometimes there are movements that happen and it very much feels like part of what is soul-making is that there isn't a logos attaching to the movement. And another is sort of in relationship. There's one example I can think of where it's almost like something was happening energetically, and part of the bit of it that was soul-making was the fact that there just wasn't a logos obviously attaching, and in a way there was a sort of blissful ignorance as to what was happening. That seemed part of the soul-making.
Yeah, good, thank you. Okay. 1, 2, 3. There were 6 apparently. James, yeah?
The word and the idea of soul itself, I'd be kind of interested if maybe you could come up with some near synonyms or some kind of simple poetic images for it.
Okay. 4? Derek?
I have another one that's when in proper Dharma practice, as we did earlier, I don't have really distinct memories, but I have memories of when that really worked or clicked for me. Like now, and I'm aware of the emptiness of how this works, of this perception, but it feels very much like those moments, had a sense of the imaginal or otherness and these kinds of things that we've been talking about, and I'm interested in. And I feel like there's implications in what you're saying, like connecting things like that.
I'm not quite understanding the question. You had experiences in prior practice that seemed kind of imaginal.
Right.
And what are you wondering?
Just want to hear you talk more about it. Sometimes seems like you're connecting those experiences to that when something works in practice, that it does have some, that we are drawn towards these moments of beauty and the autonomy of another, and even when we don't have these frameworks or this vocabulary.
Okay. I think I understand. And then was there another one? Yeah, Andrew.
Like today, wanting the energy body, you're encouraging us to find out how to energy experience. Not that more is better, but the range can be limited. So you're suggesting a long breath. And I'm just thinking of people on the foundations, listening from home and aware of the possibilities. Sometimes the body with autonomy can take over and energy can get very intense.
Yeah.
So just to cover.
Yeah, okay. So let's see if we can weave that in. Anamaka, yeah.
My question is more related to the practice. For example, and the intentionality. For example, with metta, we don't just go around and wait for metta to arise and then, it arose. there's an intentionality practice, even though I don't feel like metta right now, then there is that effort required in practice. Yeah. And I'm just wondering with the imaginal. You've mentioned several times we can't do it all day long. And I've also noticed at times that the mind feels tired and just needs to settle back and relax into more some simplicity. So just that balance of effort and settling back, because it seems that there also needs to be an intentionality. Yeah. That it's not just, an image will arrive. Yeah. Point.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Quick one. This thing about you love the image and the image loves you back. Mm-hmm. It's not quite an exchange, but I haven't got my head around that.
Okay. All right. So I don't actually know that I can remember all that now, but let's see what happens, and if I don't, so where to start? Maybe with James's question, like we use this word soul, and can I give a poetic image or something like that? I would prefer not to, actually, and there's a reason for that. I'm a little reluctant. In a way, what we're doing with this, in this paradigm, this teaching, is not prescribing images so much. Whereas in other traditions or religions, you get the images prescribed, the Eucharist or Christ on a cross or whatever it is, which is great. But there's a kind of, I don't know what you call it, like a metta stance here, metta, that images will be individual, created, discovered, etc. So in some ways, concepts, although an image is going to be elastic too and will evolve, I think for me, I feel like I'm a little bit just tentative about sort of prescribing images or offering them out, whereas concepts seem a little bit more kind of pointers in a direction that can be a bit more loose for me and then evolve. And so one of the concepts, if that's okay, one of the concepts about all this is that concepts need to be loose. They need to be elastic. And if we define them, it's like there's a real tension between defining them too tightly and rigidly, so that they can't grow, so that they can't gain depth and meaning and width and all that. That on the one hand. On the other hand, not bothering to delineate precisely and with discrimination between concepts, so that actually there isn't much fruitfulness in it. So there's this kind of dance and tension between that. And soul, almost more than any other of the concepts we use, falls right there. But we could say, I haven't said that very loosely, we could kind of give circular kind of descriptions. Soul is one way is soul is just shorthand for a sense of soulfulness, with all that means, But another way is to kind of point to it in a more subjective sense, as it usually gets used, like you have a soul, or the soul has you, or whatever. And then what might it mean there? Again, it needs to be very open, but kind of circularly, soul is the organ or the instrument of perceiving soulfully, perceiving in ways that are soul-making. And so the more we do this, the more that organ kind of grows in its powers and its range and its capacities. So seeing in ways that feel soul-making, which means the eros, the beauty, the meaningfulness, all that stuff, the eros, psyche, logos, dynamic, sensing in ways, whether it's internal or external, thinking in ways, that whole capacity, body, relating to body, in all that, the whole instrument becomes a kind of organic, alive, multifaceted organ for soul-making perception in more ways than we can, we're going to discover, etc. So that leaves for me that leaves it very wide, but gives a sense of what it might be. Yeah, is that?
Yeah, thank you. If I could ask short, slightly cheeky follow-up. If the word soul didn't exist, do you have a sense of what word you might use instead?
Psyche.
Psyche.
Okay, so forgotten some of the questions, but I did mention. So, what happens in this growing of the range and the kind of kinds and depths and even modes of perceiving soulfully is they are created and discovered. We discover them. Something happens. And so there's this word, who was it who asked this one? Create, discover. Yeah. So there may be a word in English that, I don't know if Catherine said this before I came to this morning, but there may be a word in English which means something like both created and discovered at the same time. So not a bit created and a bit discovered. This bit's created, but that bit's discovered. Something that somehow means that completely in one. I don't know if there's a word. I don't.
Magic.
Okay, great. Yeah. So magic, or I just put create/discover. And in a way, what that does is it for me it reflects a little bit related to Anna Monica's question, which I'll come back to later. The actual sense we have. So a lot of the language you use is kind of just giving words to things that I think, if we just let this process happen, we'll get this sense. So a bit like the real, not real thing. Sometimes you ask someone working with an image, does it feel real or not real? And it'd be like, well, kind of neither and both, you know. And that's just a natural evolution of the soul-making process. That's what we kind of begin to notice and sense about some soul-making perception. But just so is the create-discover, because there's a sense that I am doing this, I am creating this, but there's also a sense that I'm discovering something, I'm stumbling across something was given to me. Does it make sense? So in a way, that element, create/discover or magic, reflects both, or is designed to reflect both. Oh, you'll notice this, you know, and there's this word or phrase for it is just, oh, this is characteristic of soul-making experiences, it's characteristic of sensing the soul. It's got this kind of strange amalgam of the two, yeah. But it's also intended as a kind of, if you like, guide or balance point, so that when I remember, that's an element, then I remember something of my participation in the creation and the discovery. This has to do with the node of participation. And that does something that's connected to the neither real nor not real. It does something to my whole relationship with what I'm perceiving, whether it's something in the world or another or something purely internal, etc. And that it seems to narrow it, because we're saying, oh, not that and not that, this thing in the middle, create, discover, or neither real nor not. At first it seems to narrow it, but it's like, you know, the old phrase, narrow is the gate, narrow is the path, but then it opens. It's by virtue of going on that just for a while, it might feel a little like, well, what are they talking about, and why do I have to constrain it to that, and why can't I just feel it this way or that way? It's all good, but there's something about this narrow gate in a lot of these things that then opens up way wider than either of the other two, or just what I create or just what I discover. So it's kind of it's something to remember occasionally in practice, and that remembering kind of starts to shape my sense of what's going on, and my sense of what's going on shapes my relationship with what's going on, and that determines what then is possible. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I listened to it a couple of times more.
Okay, it's some of these concepts are tricky, and like I said, there's not really a word in English, because we don't. A lot of the way we think in English about reality and about self and object is dualistic, and when we go to non-duality, we just kind of go to a kind of all one soup or something like that. And this is neither. This is neither. Okay. Both of those are great. It's fantastic to perceive and conceive dualistically at times. It's really, really important. And it's a lovely range of experiences and really important mystical experiences that happen when everything dissolves in some kind of mystical soup. But there's this other thing, let's call it in the middle, that seems narrow at first and then opens up a whole other range of experiences. And we don't really have the language for that, partly because language is based on notions of subject and object, and the verb is this thing done by the subject in relation to the object. Does that make sense? So that's, maybe there are much better ways of explaining this, but that's all I can come up with now. There's something curious about this a certain range here that really is not well captured in, certainly in English language. I don't know enough about other languages, but I presume not so well either, but I don't know. Yeah. So yeah, it takes a while, but again, a lot of these elements are things that we notice. So we're teaching kind of from the front here, but we could just say, like, if you just keep doing this stuff, at some point, these are things you'll notice anyway, regardless of whether you've heard them. If you're practicing with enough kind of sensitivity of what, what's going on, what's the feeling here, that I think you'd have some kind of sense of things when it really feels soul-making. That is exactly that. Now, you might put it in your own words, but it will be reflecting the same thing. Does that make sense? And so that's very related to participation, which was actually just part of your question, Naomi. And what were some others? I'm forgetting now.
With awakening.
Yeah. What's that?
Fullness of participation.
Fullness of intention. Who asked that one?
I think the note.
It's the same one. Fullness of intention and awakening. It was both you, Naomi. Yeah. So, yeah, there's so much to say about this one. So maybe and I've talked a lot about it. So if you're interested, you can hear hours and hours and hours of me wittering on about this stuff. Maybe, yeah. But yeah, there's many, many hours on this. So there's a recent talk called What is Awakening? There's a whole, I can't remember the titles, but whole hours of segments of talks in Eros Unfettered, and a couple of years before that, in, I think it was November Solitary here, there was a talk called Questioning Awakening, and it had two follow-on parts, something like Buddhism Beyond Modernism and In Praise of Restlessness. And that forms a 3-part set, and there's probably others, and maybe some other people can tell you, but there's lots and lots of material, so this is really key, I guess just try and be brief with this on what's, again, one of those actually, I think by definition, the way I would like to approach it is that it's one of these endlessly expanding subjects. So that is not typically how we think of awakening. We tend to think of that is awakening, or it's like this, I've got it or I don't, or I'm halfway there, or whatever it is. In this paradigm, it's actually the notion of awakening is ever expanding. And that relates to a bit like this buffet of treasures that I described the other day. And terrible, I want it. And actually, it's just glory upon glory of beautiful creation discovery. But having said that, just to make a historical note that contextualizes all this is that if you're around enough, even around at Gaia House, just Gaia House, let alone going to Japan and looking at the history of Dharma in different countries, and you ask even just teachers or retreatants, what's your idea or image, what's your idea of what awakening is, what's your image of what an awakened person looks like and where this is going, you're going to get, just from Gaia House teachers, just from Gaia House Teacher Council, you're going to get a huge... Oh, yeah, I didn't know. You're going to get a huge range. That is you could just say that's the historical state of Buddha Dharma. You could also say, well, there's a reason why we have range that has more to do with the nature of soul. Okay, but I'll put that one aside. So you ask people, sometimes awakening means coping with the existential, obvious reality of a meaningless material world, your birth and your death in that, and kind of just bearing up with that. And that's what awakening means, and trying to be kind with that, and trying to have the courage to face the reality of that. For some people, that's what awakening means. For other people, awakening is just talking about a moment of awakening when there's this sort of fresh perception of things that doesn't seem to have a lot of ideation to it or a lot of will, and that's a moment of awakening, and there's no grand awakening beyond that. For other people, awakening has to do with this transcendent, unfabricated, where one experiences in meditation the deeper and deeper fading of things, opening up to a realm that is completely beyond anything we can put into language, and that telling us something about all this, which might be a kind of rejection of all this. None of this is samsara, this is worthless, this is nothing. The best thing to do is to get out of this and not be reborn again. And the one who is not reborn again is the awakened one. And stages of awakening are moving towards how near am I to not coming back to all this world of perception. Just samsara, just worthless. And you could go on and on and on, the different shades of it. What does it mean? And then even track back, okay, so awakening is to do with the third noble truth in relation to the first noble truth of dukkha. And then we ask, what is dukkha? What actually are we addressing when we say suffering? And some of it's obvious, what it means. But if you expand the range of what that can mean. So there's all that, and I find it absolutely fascinating, and fascinating how easily we can become really closed, around a certain point of view. And what's the place of soul in that, whether we're conscious of it or not? Why is it that a person chooses to opt for this vision? It's not just because it makes sense. I see how the pieces fit together. When I choose a vision of awakening, I'm actually choosing a cosmos. I'm choosing a vision of the cosmos, and I'm choosing a vision of the self in response to that cosmos. A person can choose. I choose a meaningless cosmos in which the nobility of the self is to show up and just bear with that and have that kind of dignity and bravery and openness. Or a person can choose a magical cosmos, layers and dimensions and the participation of the soul in the creation, discovery of perception, etc., etc. So this psychologically, I think it's an incredibly interesting question. Why? Why choose this one or that one? What's going on for this personality or that personality? Without any right or wrong, but just seeing the whole thing actually from a soul perspective. So we can look at what we're doing here, this improper Dharma, as from the perspective of proper Dharma, and kind of fit it into, okay, so there's a lot of papancha going on, clearly. And clearly there's a lot of craving, and there's a lot of overthinking. Or one can also turn... one can also turn things round and look at certain other versions of Dharma from a soul-making understanding. Again, why is the soul gravitating towards that? What is it about? And again, I go back to what I said the other day. When we're in love with the path, any of those versions of those people who have those different visions, love it. And there's eros there. They might not have that language, but basically something has become an image and a whole set of concepts that are meaningful to their soul and attractive to their soul. So then you have a whole soul psychology kind of, not deconstruction, but perspective on conventional. So there's all that, yeah? Okay, so then there's just this question of suffering and dukkha, and related to the fullness of intention. And I can only speak from my experience of dukkha I meet and what I'm dealing with and have had to deal with in the past, etc. And also working with people, working a lot, especially one-to-one, with people, with abuse history, sexual abuse and trauma and all kinds of stuff with this paradigm, okay? And what it seems to me at this point, I think I said it somewhere or other, at this point I kind of just have an absolute trust that all kinds of dukkha can be healed through imaginal work. Not necessarily they will be in this session, or a person is quite ready for that, or even quite ready to even look at things that way, bring that. But I just have that sense. And if I'm working with someone one-on-one, is that doorway open? Can I sense that may be available for this person right now? And my experience is that there's a healing available through the imaginal that kind of addresses hurts and pains and soul torments and histories that other psychological paradigms, which I'm quite well versed in some, don't seem to do, and mindfulness doesn't quite do it, and even emptiness doesn't quite do it. And so that was really interesting to me, really interesting, and I've just seen that over and over again. That's to the point where I just trust it. What makes that work better is this fullness of intention, kind of semi-paradoxically. That healing can be part of what I want, this ending of this dukkha, but if I can include a sense of, actually, I want that in something even bigger, which is this fullness of soul-making and sense of sacredness. I want to in-soul my dukkha. I want to in-soul my history and the pain of my past and whatever it is. Somehow, if that fullness of intention can open up, then that it's more easy for this multi-spectrum, multi-level, far-reaching, far-penetrating sort of healing to happen. Yeah? So there's that. Third thing, I could talk for hours on it, but I'm not going to. This is the last thing I'm going to say for this. Third thing is, I've forgotten what it is now. And I've shared this again in some of those recent talks, and I would say that, so again, what does suffering mean? So we talk about awakening third noble truth in relation to the first noble truth. What does dukkha mean? And it might be that different ages, certainly different people, but different ages, different eras, different cultures and different times have different kinds of dukkha. So that there probably have been in the history of humanity many, many cultures and societies and eras where a crisis of a lack of meaningfulness, or what we might call a lack of soulfulness, it just wasn't a pain. It wasn't there, or rather it was very, very rare. Whereas I think a key kind of strata of the dukkha of our society now at this time is the dukkha and the pain of soulfulness. And one of the things I shared, one of the things I shared on those talks was, so I had cancer, etc., and going to chemotherapy at the hospital in Plymouth, and it's a huge hospital, and it was so hard for me. It was really on the edge of my practice. Yes, it was hard physically. Yes, it was hard. There was an enormous amount of dukkha there, etc. What was really hard for me was the soullessness of the place. Everything was plastic. There was this kind of cheeriness. Death was in the room, and people were sort of, and the way one is looked at by the medical system as basically, I'm a bag of chemicals with some really not very promising statistics attached to it, and all of that, primarily the plastic and the lack of aesthetics, and of all the things, and all the physical dukkha and all the possibility of dying, etc., that was a thing that was just on the edge of my practice. And sometimes it was really hard. I couldn't quite, while I was sitting there with this plastic pipes and you're pumping poison into the body, and that was the thing that was really hard. There's a dukkha of soulfulness. That's a level of dukkha that, again, in the Dhamma, we don't really have that language. We don't, so it's like creating these words to open up something. Look, there is a pain for many people at that level. Meaningfulness, soulfulness, etc. So again, when we talk about awakening, in third noble truth, in relation to the first noble truth, what do we mean by suffering? What kinds of suffering, and what do they need? How will they be healed? Yeah. So that's some of what's in there. Yeah. The logos piece, is that okay? Just to, the logos piece. So when we use the word logos, we don't mean anything necessarily obvious. So those two experiences you describe in relationship and moving, there wasn't any kind of heavy edifice or machinery of like philosophical, structure there. But just the fact that you could say it felt soul-making implies that there's even something like what we call soul making, even though you haven't like delineated it, and something of a soul and something of a value to that. So that's enough logos, right there. When we use the word logos or concept, we mean from something very complex, sophisticated, subtle conceptual structure, all the way down to just what I said, I think, earlier today. Any perception whatsoever of subject, object, and time, that's already concept. It's percept. So it could be just the most bare sense of momentary awareness with nothing happening. And that's what I perceive, nothing. And it's happening now, in this moment. That's already concept. So we're talking about something really, really subtle. It doesn't have to be. And yet, one of the things, this is not what you're asking, Dave, but one of the possibilities is a kind of quietening of the concept, but there's still a bare concept there, subtle. One of the other possibilities is that while we're working with an image and it's touching the heart and the energy body is going and we're moved and the soul is resonating, the mind can actually be kind of intuitively flickering and getting insights and seeing how different, I don't know if you've had this experience, how different elements fit together and how the structure works and how soul making happens. So sometimes in the process of soul making it really involves the intellect just in a kind of very, I don't know, almost automatic way, So there's that possibility too. Yeah. I don't know how okay you are with this. It's like 25 to... Okay, Derek. I didn't quite understand the question, but let me say something, see if it's accurate. If it's
You spoke to it a little bit.
Okay. Maybe it's the piece that I think part of bringing out this vocabulary and making these discernments is to say that this kind of stuff is going on anyway. This is just what the soul does. Either we have, so-called intrapsychic images in meditating, and it comes out. And people have told me, I've been meditating for 20 years, Vipassana, insight meditation, and I never tell anyone these things that happen because it doesn't seem like it's welcome. Maybe it's not welcome. So the soul does create, discover. It's part of what it does. There's that way. And then there's also the fact that if you love something, if you are devoted to something, it has become fantasy for you. It has become image, which means the sense of sitting there on a hot day and working and dedicating yourself, the sense of the Buddha, the sense of the path, the sense of it's all part of the love and dedication and devotion and eros to the path, whatever it is. Yeah. But I don't know if that's quite what you're asking. Or... Yeah,
I get that. You've talked about that before, but it's just interesting for me to hear about it and to hear about, to think about that, that perspective on the practice, and then that sense of that's already happening, and then coming towards this and going, oh, okay, I have these tools for working with something that's already wanting to happen, a process that's already kind of going in that direction. Yeah, that's part of it, exactly. Giving us the tools, the concepts, the refinements of skill and awareness that can navigate that. But there's a second thing to me, which is also, and I think I must have said it yesterday morning when I talked about desire, it's like, when we don't have the words and no one talks about certain concepts, we almost blind ourselves to them. And so, I asked you guys, is that really what you love? Is that really what you're doing this for? Just the decrease of suffering? That's what draw you to Buddha Dharma? And it's almost like just giving us the concepts and talking about it makes us realize, I think in a lot of cases, there's more going on here. Yet we haven't had the language for it. And when we don't have the language, it's almost like we can't fill out the psychological understanding and see what it needs. Does that make sense? Which to me is an important part of just psychological awareness of self. Like what's going on in my life? What is it? How do I operate? How do I get drawn to something and galvanized and all that? And that's for me a really important piece. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Andrew, was there someone else?
There was one about the intention of a metta compared to metta.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Let's do that and then come back to that. So that's a really important one. Yeah. So I think I would say all practice or deepening in any practice. We could be talking about metta, we could be talking about samadhi or emptiness practice or mindfulness or whatever. As it matures, the deepening involves a kind of learning to play with the gas pedal. and a little bit more, a little bit less. In the larger sense, as in, well, I'd probably take a break the next sitting or whatever, or I'll sit late into the night, or whatever, in the larger sense, but also in the micro sense of how much effort, how much pressure, how much sort of direct intentionality, direction of intentionality, activity is there in the moment. And that's not an on-off switch. It can be really, really finely tuned in any practice. And I would say that's a really important part of any practice deepening, again, the sensitivity, the skill developing. And the same is true of soul making and imaginal practice. I think there's almost intrinsic to soul making, there's in the create discover thing right there, you got the create is active and the discover is passive. You've also got one of the nodes is grace. In other words, grace, the thing about grace is just inexplicable gift. It's just like, why was I given this? I didn't do anything, it just showed up. And you've got the first node is the idea of the lattice, implicit in which is, hey, we can do subtle things that support the soul making. So right in that whole 28 nodes, you've got the implicit sort of dance of not just effort, but also attitude. I see it as grace. I can see it as grace. I can see it as something that is an art for me that I can play with. You understand? So there's effort, but there's also attitude and kind of way of looking or way of conceiving. And I think with a lot of soul-making stuff, it's quite a delicate poise. So even just to have the intention to be receptive to an image, it's very different when you said it's like, oh, an image will show up sometime. Maybe, probably not with that, if that's the, it's whatever. There's a kind of real, there's already a kind of humility in the poise of like, let's see what comes, and opening. And I can feel there's just already a kind of delicacy. There's already a sensitivity. There's an openness. There's the possibility. There's already humility of a kind. I may not even know to what, to soul, to psyche, to the divinity, whatever, Buddha nature. And there's the beginnings of all these things. So that poise is a kind of intention or a kind of place on the intentional spectrum. And so that's very much part of it. It's very much more delicate than like, right, I'm gonna, whatever it is. So this is very, very delicate. I mean, sometimes the energies that come and the eros that comes is really strong, but a lot of it is really, really subtle and delicate, and the kind of poise of intentionality or receptivity that we could. So it's the intention to be receptive a lot of the time, as much as anything. Does that make sense? And as always, it's not a fixed place. It's an arena. This whole thing: intentionality, grace, receptivity, humility, activity, art. They're just an arena for us to play and experiment in and see what happens. And it's never like, nailed it, now that's it. Just as it is not with any practice. Kind of bandage the gas pedal in that position and just leave it there. It's always kind of, it's very subtly modulated in the art of response, Yeah. Does that okay? Good. Last thing, if it's okay, the energy body. Yeah, thank you. So is there a kind of danger in alerting attention to the possibility of kind of, for instance, breathing in certain ways where the energy body can have more energy? Yeah. Potentially, yeah. My experience sort of meeting loads of people over the years is that most people don't have enough energy. Or rather, the energy is moving in their system in a way that is just jangled and kind of not really harmonizing in a way that actually creates a lot of available energy. So that kind of, making a choice, for most people, either the energy doesn't harmonize, or again, there's a kind of restriction on just how much energy they will allow, how much energy we're used to flowing in the body. So I think if I'm not taking too much care to be completely comprehensive, I'll lean towards that side of like, this is probably most common. I go teach places or here, and I can just feel, and there's every good reason for it, lots of reasons, but oftentimes people they might feel quite chaotic and agitated inside, but actually it's a state of not much energy. So I kind of, if I've not got much time, I'll lean on that side. But yeah, I guess there's a danger, but in that context, I wouldn't kind of harp too much on the possibility of too much energy, because, and that I believe, or I feel very much that in a lot of cases when there is too much energy and flowing in different ways, that it's a lot easier to fix and liberate than a lot of people say, and you've experienced that. So I don't tend to get too anxious about that stuff. Persons has that experience with me, I know how to kind of make it not so much a problem. So.
They're not.
Yeah.
Heart and soul within this practice.
Yeah, it's true. There is a danger, and Catherine and I had this conversation. It's like, actually, it wasn't quite what she's saying, so I don't want to put words in her mouth. But yeah, putting these teachings out about following imagination and eros, and wow, maybe some people would just take it and run with it, and make crazy, Yeah, it's there. I think just the balance of things for me, it just felt a calling that it was necessary to do it. So, yeah. If they're not, then they can get in touch. I mean, if they're not with me, then I don't know.
But also, there's two sides to it. It's also possibly a smoother path, isn't it? More a smoother path than some, both in terms of energy and other difficulties. Yeah, I
think the way we tend to work with energy allows it to smooth more and not be so problematic. So there's ways of working with energy body where you're just like lighting fireworks to some kind of powder keg, and it's often not that helpful. So the way we tend to do it is much more organic, gentle, and things can open in a much more harmonized way. But yeah, does that okay for you? Yeah, I think that was it.
Well, that was my question about the love and
Oh yeah. Let me just say one thing, because I'm aware of time. We need to eat. Yeah, the tea wash. I think it's a matter of just having that idea that it's possible for you to notice, but expanding the idea of what that could possibly look like or feel like or mean. So when we think love, we tend to think, it's going to look this way. But sometimes it can be fierce or kind of very stern or whatever. Yeah. So just expand the range and then just look. Oh yeah, there's this kind, but I hadn't really thought of that as a kind of face of love before. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Okay, very good. Let's have a bit of quiet.
Thank you for listening. To learn how you can support the teachers and Dharma Seed, please visit dharmaseed.org/donate.